started having some issues and dissatisfaction in lots of areas of my life, which started me seeking again. And I tried to go back to the meditation and the stuff like that. And when I tried it again, I realized this is empty. Yeah, I can clear my mind and get and put this aside and get to that still happy place or whatever you want to call it. But when I come out of it, it's right there waiting for me when I open my eyes.
So it actually is kind of like drinking or whatever. It's like you can escape,
Yeah. The meditation is an escape. And, to tie it to where you started with the yoga and those sorts of things, those are connected. For someone to say that yoga isn't connected with the spiritual practice that's behind it is they're fooling themselves.
Maybe for a short time. There's some measure of satisfaction spiritually, but there's no substance to it.
If I can interject here. So there's a difference between being a spiritual person and a religious person. A spiritual person believes in something other than himself, higher being or something divine or cosmic, while a religious person, and I think that's where we get mixed up, is a person who believes in a specific religion. So when people ask, are you religious? We really have to define what that really is, because the term religious and the term spiritual are, to me, distinct.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people might even be confused by that, and they kind of think of anybody who believes in God as religious. And I don't know, Pastor, what do you kind of say or think about like religion? Like when people equate that to somebody who believes in God, could you like give us kind of like a breakdown of what religion kind of means?
I would say like spirituality is the thought process, the questioning regarding those things that are outside the physical world. So, obviously we know we can define our physical existence, but if we think about, how did all of this get here? Was there an intelligence that put these things in this place? Is there a God? Is there life after death? What happens after a person dies? Those would all be spiritual questions. And where religion comes in is it tries to define the answers to those spiritual questions. So you really can't have, and I know this is an infatuation in our society today, you can't have spirituality without religion, without just having pure anarchy of whatever you want, or maybe the better way to say it is not anarchy, but idolatry. Because then you as the individual you define your own religion for yourself. There might not be a label. It might not be, Catholicism per se, but it is, Adam religion. So he's asked these spiritual questions, and he's come to an understanding, and these are his answers, what he's comfortable with. And there is a bit of exalting of that idea. Well, I'm spiritual, I'm just not religious. And you really can't have one without the other. Otherwise, you're just defining a religion for yourself. It's not really based on anything other than what you think, feel, decide.
I've spoken to a lot of people that don't know if they even believe in the spiritual world, or like if they're a soul. Like they think like their physical body and the physical world is all that there is. And then I guess a lot of people probably struggle with the thought of people who are religious, or religion in general, are people that are looking for answers and they just want to feel better about themselves type thing. But I think that as we observe like reality, like it's undeniable that there is a spiritual world. Like there's forces outside of ourselves, and obviously we conclude that the Bible has the answers on these things. But if somebody wasn't to believe in the Bible yet, I think it would be obvious to observe the reality and just see that, there are things going on that humans couldn't be behind. Like there are things that are going on that, like, if you look at politics, you look at the direction of certain countries, things that are going on, and like a lot of people can connect the dots. Like they'll start to see like, oh wow, and then their conclusion a lot of times is, oh, the world leaders must be having these secret meetings and coming up with these plans and then like manipulating everything for it to come together in the way that they want. Stuff like that probably does happen, but they don't have that much control. Like you can start to see, especially if you've lived for any length of time, any few decades, you start to see the like course of the world trends. And like I think even today, so America has gone from like believing like the Bible, like Christianity, a lot of people like to deny that, but we were a Christian nation, and now we're moving much more towards, like Pastor was saying, idolatry. Just create the god of your own mind, imagination. Brian, you kind of came out of like mysticism. I know a lot of people are like into yoga and stuff, and they, it seems harmless, and it even seems good to a lot of people. It's like, this is good meditation type stuff. But we know that there's a spiritual complex to it. Actually, it's surrounded by that and kind of engulfed in that. And you can't have one without the other, apparently. So could you like share your testimony and like how you came to the conclusion of like believing the Bible?
I started out when I was growing up. I went through the usual, I guess you'd say, kid church stuff, Sunday school, a little bit of vacation Bible school, confirmation class, all that. After getting through confirmation class, that sort of makes you a church member in that particular denomination. Happens about when you're 16, and my mom basically said, okay, you're old enough to make your own decision whether you're going to go to church or not. And the decision on my part was not.
At 16.
At 16. But at the time, I was also starting to look into various mysticism sort of things. Meditation, Eastern mysticism, Taoism in particular.
No question. Were you like a Beatles fan? Did they influence you at all?
But I will freely admit that I'm a child of the 80s, and the New Age movement was absolutely huge in the 80s.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was just everywhere. It was the popular thing.
Is that like hippies as well?
No, that's the 60s.
Yeah, that's the 60s. New Age went, I would say, a little bit more toward almost, the 60s had sort of like almost like a Hindu basis to it, whereas the 80s went more towards the Eastern, like China, the Buddhism end of things, and even touching back into like the paganism of like the Celtic people, stuff like that.
Interesting, because when I was making the movie in Ireland, we had to do a lot of research on the Druids and kind of like the Celtic background to that. And we actually had to create characters based off of these beliefs. And, and we don't have that much information on them, but we could kind of see the results of those type of people, which is really just like believing in whatever God they have. It's all confusion. But anyways, I'm sorry for cutting off.
And it really does have an element to it of animism, worshiping nature, Mother Earth sort of concept to it with the Druids and the Celtic influence,
which was big in our time, in the time of the 80s and into the 90s. You would see things that kids were being indoctrinated, like the cartoon Captain Planet, where they were all about preserving the earth, and the big overarching theme was that this Mother Earth figure was an actual reality to kids in regards to that. Yeah.
And so that's what I started getting into.
Now, what made you, other than all those influences, is that the main thing, or is there something else?
It was those influences, and really, and I would say it kind of touches on what Pastor Gable said already, and I would say that the difference between religion and spiritual, when people talk about it, is exactly what he said. It's a religion of your own making. And so you take a piece of this and a piece of that. It's like a buffet line religion is what most people think of when they say I'm spiritual but not religious. I think most people, when they say they're religious, think of a set of rules that they have to keep. Whereas this is, I make my own rules, and I really haven't thought about it deeply enough to make it a consistent rule book, and lets me do what I want and makes me feel good, and agrees with the things that I believe and I think, and that I can reason out myself.
Now, you gave the two examples of mysticism and spirituality versus religion. Pastor, could you tell us what's the difference between that and what we would believe with the Bible, a relationship with Jesus?
Well, I think the attraction is that it is number one, less restrictive. So you can do whatever you would like to do, whatever you want to do, and there's no accountability. And it's then framing that in the idea that this is something that's new, something that's different.
And that's always intriguing.
It's intriguing to me because it's not new and it's not different.
Right. No, exactly.
It's the same idea. It was in the Garden of Eden, the serpent saying to Eve, you can be as God's, knowing good and evil. You can do this on your own without any external restrictions, without you being hemmed in any sort of way. You can be God and make your own God. And I'm not any expert on mysticism, Eastern religions, and all of that. But the idea is it's always the same. It's it is whatever you make it up to be. And when you hear someone trying to define those things, it is literally like trying to grab smoke or steam. It's just what in the world are you talking about? And it's well, they're the only ones who can really understand what they're talking about, which is very convenient because that means that there's no accountability. Nobody can say, wait, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. There's nothing there. So it allows you to escape all forms of accountability. And we have to come to the place, and it's probably skipping ahead a little bit, but come to the place that is what we as human beings have wanted from the get-go, from the beginning. We want to do what we want to do without restriction, without accountability. And here's a way you can kind of answer, sort of, some of those spiritual questions while at the same time not getting hemmed in by accountability.
I look at it from the point of view, too, is that, it's good to acknowledge that we're spiritual. It's good to have an acknowledgement that there is more than just this physical realm. What I tend to have had in my personal experience is also the fact that outside of having the baseline that Scripture gives us, do we really know what spirits we're inviting in? What spirits are being called upon? Well, how do you determine if a spirit is good or not, if not into the guidelines of what we believe would be Scripture? I spoke to someone who says, I don't need to go to a church to spend time with God. And that is absolutely true, But how do we know that the spirit in which we are invoking, in nature is actually the Spirit of God, which they couldn't answer. And for reasons we know, it's because they know not of what spirit they're requesting.
And I think it's a lot of the reason is because people are not truly seeking truth. Because if you're seeking truth, you want to know, am I being lied to or not? You're going to really want some concrete answers. You're going to really want to know, you don't want a mystery surrounding really any of your beliefs, because this is life or death. This is when you start to take it more seriously and you're okay, this is going to change my life. And the things that even I like doing, I might have to sacrifice those or give those up. I want to make sure this is true. And
I believe people take it serious. And I believe people take it so serious, and it did start, within the time of the 60s, is that they also involved with their seeking of this higher spiritual self. They're adding agents to try to get you to that higher self, through drugs and through hallucinogens, through, the use of...
Through gurus.
And gurus, yes. Tarot cards.
And that's part of the mysticism thing, too, is, okay, and this ties into it, is the spiritual. Okay, we recognize that we're spiritual, and the underlying concept is that you're already connected to it. You're already connected to God. You just need to wake up.
Discover it.
In some areas, right. Open your mind, open yourself, open this or that to let more of it in, that there isn't a problem. The problem with you is not a problem in you. It's a problem that you're restricting yourself from experiencing everything that so-called God wants to reveal to you or have you participate in or whatever. And to tie into what Pastor said is, because it's a hodgepodge of these things, it is sort of intellectual too. It's that pride aspect of it. Like, oh, I know so much. And that's where the gurus come in. You say, oh, I have to go with this guy because he knows so much more than me, but then I can know as much as him. And never mind you don't take the time to say, does this equal this? And even if you do look at that, and it's a paradox, you think of yourself as intellectually superior, that I can hold on to these two contradictory things and believe them both at the same time. That makes me somehow superior than somebody who says, oh, I just believe this or I just believe that. And so it appeals to that pride also of your own self-knowledge, and that you are, if not God, at least directly connected. You just need to become more aware of it.
And it's rather convenient to be able to say, well, if you were as smart as I am, then you would have the same conclusions. You would be able to define the same thing. It's rather convenient whenever you sort of get boxed into a corner, whether and forced to define, what does that mean? Does that make sense? Is there any truth to that? To be able to say, well, here's the explanation, and if you don't understand that, it's because you don't have the experiences that I have. And you don't have the intelligence that I have.
I don't think you run into that very often either, where people are willing to challenge you on something that you say that you believe.
Right. The serpent had told Eve in the Genesis, he says, that you would be, your eyes shall be
opened.
Yep.
And you shall be as gods.
If I could speak English, that's exactly what it would say. But yeah, that you would be as God. And isn't that the desire of every man or every person, especially those that actually find a sense of spirituality within themselves, is to be equal, right? It's sort of like that intelligence level. I'm in a higher level. I'm in a higher degree. So that means I am more spiritual than you, more intellectual, and that makes me more God than you.
It's kind of, it reminds me of Mormons. It's like they directly believe that you can be as gods. Like they think you can morph into that. So, Brother Fetterman, we kind of skipped around. Going back to what you were saying, how you kind of, you got into this type of thing. So tell us what else was there?
It involved meditation and reading various texts, which are exactly that. They're paradoxical statements, one after another, and at odds with each other. And okay, you think you're wise, that you can understand both these things at the same time, and really, for me, I went into the direction of art in college. And so that whole idea of creativity, just following your imagination, and those sorts of things, is also a channel to open yourself up to these things as well. And you just go deeper and deeper into it as you try and get more and more creative or imaginative and those sorts of things.
I got to ask you the question. We're all wondering, were there drugs involved with all this?
No.
For you? Okay, there wasn't. Interesting.
The only drug I was involved with was alcohol. And that was a source of pride for me, too. Look how creative I am, and I don't need all that garbage.
Interesting. Yeah, because, obviously, a lot of times their drugs become a little bit more attractive to people that are kind of into this type of thing, especially like tripping on harder drugs, because then they really escape reality. It's like, I always described it as like opening another department of your brain and kind of like seeing things a lot differently. And that's like intriguing for these type of people who are like, trying to enter into the spiritual world, but doing it artificially or, in the wrong way.
Right.
Anyways, I'm sorry. So what were you saying?
No, I really didn't feel like I needed to mess with that stuff to be creative, as it were, to see things differently. But it was definitely a part of my life all through college. Then get out of college and, okay, it's time to get to work. It's time to make a living in the world.
Stop sitting around and
join the real world.
Exactly.
And so I even dropped that stuff after a while. Because, again, people who are spiritual, myself at that time, is, okay, this is how I interpret these things. And really, it's not that important to me. I don't want it to necessarily impact or change my life, like Pastor was saying. And now that I'm moving on to a different phase of life, I dropped that too, and just let it go, and was worried about plain simple materialism. And so I stopped the meditation and all that for a while. And then 2004, 2005, started having some issues.
Reflection or okay.
Just frustration,
Okay.
And dissatisfaction in lots of areas of my life, which started me seeking again. And I tried to go back to the meditation and the stuff like that. And when I tried it again, I realized this is empty. Yeah, I can clear my mind and put this aside and get to that still happy place, or whatever you want to call it. But when I come out of it, it's right there waiting for me when I open my eyes.
So it actually is kind of like drinking or whatever. It's like you can escape,
Yeah. The meditation is an escape. And, to tie it to where you started with the yoga and those sorts of things, those are connected. For someone to say that yoga isn't connected with the spiritual practice that's behind it, is they're fooling themselves. It is about going to that happy place. It is about escape. It is about just shutting off the world instead of dealing with it.
Yeah.
And as much as they want to say otherwise, that's where it's at. And that's why I realized. And I pick up the book again, and this is nonsense.
Now, this is before you even really were sure if you believed in the Christian God.
Right.
Okay.
It was.
You
It was what most
recognized it
people
was
would say.
kinda
I
silly.
believe there's a God, and it was a hodgepodge of the things that I was exposed to that I thought about him. It was a smorgasbord, and it's just none of it's just like little islands of belief that don't necessarily need to connect. But then, if they don't connect, then they don't function. They don't have really a use beyond escape.
Wow.
And
There's no substance to it.
and
I think
there's nothing there.
That's the key word in thinking about it. And I would challenge anybody, who is, dabbling in those sorts of things. I mean, honestly and truly, in your heart of hearts, is there substance to it? Because you're talking about, there's escape maybe for a short time. There's some measure of satisfaction spiritually, but there's no substance to it. And of course, the Bible tells us, and the call of God is, "Come, let us reason together." And God, he interacts with us, but he interacts with us using the gift of reason that he's given us. Does it actually make sense? Do those islands actually need to connect? And they do. You can't have conflicting beliefs and hold to both of them at the same time. That doesn't make any sense. So is there any real substance there? And if you come to the Bible, if you come to what is true Christianity, not just man-made religion that calls itself Christianity, but true Christianity, and you ask yourself the question, is there substance here? Is there an answering of the fundamental spiritual questions that I'm struggling with? Is there a cohesive worldview and a cohesive way of approaching spirituality that not only satisfies, but also it makes sense? It all adds up. There's true substance there. That's really the contrast. You have indefinable undefinable smoke, and then you have real substance.
Right.
And that's the difference.
So spirituality is not bad, right? Having a sense of a spiritual nature, spiritual realm, spiritual world, that is not bad. It seems like we're leading and the conversation is gone. It's just how do you direct that sense of spirituality to a place that brings profit, right? In the sense of enrichment of our lives and brings meaning, right? Because that's what we're all looking for. We look for this meaning, and how does this meaning enrich our lives? So if I spend all of my time, so for me, growing up, I was taught that things like yoga and all these spiritual things, those were like scary Halloween type things that you don't mess with, right? Because then you get possessed by something you don't want to be possessed by.
I pretty much believe that too, yeah.
Yeah, that's how I grew up. I was taught that you just don't mess with those things. But the reality is if we have the right measures and the right tools, then inviting the right spirit, which would be the spirit of the Lord, into someone's life actually brings that profit and that inner peace that we're looking for scattered throughout nature or drugs, alcohol, arts, all of those things. It's just a matter of really focusing. Because like you were saying, you have no real answer. And one moment you're here, this next second you're here with ideas and philosophy. And where does that lead you? Other than then people can probably say, I'll do the yoga exercises, but I don't believe in the yoga, transcendental meditation type stuff. So we'll do some of the work, but take out that whole spiritual side. And it's sad that there are even churches, right? You use churches that do that. They take things from the world, remove what's bad, and implement that and say, well, this is good because, we can translate this into God and into what we believe.
Well, there's two fundamental errors there. One, on one side, is the denial of the spiritual.
Right.
And you cannot extricate spirituality from human beings and from many of the things that you're talking about. There's no way to split those two things in half. So that's the one error on one side, and then the error on the other side is just flipped. It is we are spiritual beings. We have been created in that way. We do have that draw and that hunger. The question then is, what is informing your spirituality?
Mm-hmm.
And is it just you? Undefinable based on your wishes and whatever is coming from your mind? Are you the definer, or is something else? Does something else deserve to inform that spirituality?
Because wouldn't there be a more learned person, right, in every spiritual journey? If we take that approach, then there's always going to be someone with a higher level of spirituality along the journey a little further. So how do you, if that's always going to be the next thing, how does that stay stable, right? That's very...
Stable is a good word for this conversation.
The foundation of it is it crumbles really quickly because then you can always go to a higher. And the higher understanding of spiritual sense brings a new definition. So there's no stability in that.
Hey, hold your thought.
Yeah, undefinable.
All right, so basically contradictions. You brought up contradictions, and obviously a lot of people are going to feel attacked, or they might feel attacked, and then they're going to say, oh, there's all these contradictions in the Bible. So I just want to address that real quick, and if any of you guys have something to put input on this. When we're looking at the Bible and we see two things that look like they're contrast or look like they're contradictory, you can actually have two truths that look contradictory, but it's in different places they're still true in different times in different scenarios. So they're not a contradiction, and that's when you look at the Bible, you got to see like it's not telling you to not answer a fool according to his folly and then answer a fool according to his folly. Those verses are pretty much right next to each other. The writer of Proverbs wasn't contradicting himself and not realizing it. That's foolish to even think that. Really, when we see things in the Bible that look like a contradiction, it's just in their place they are true. Does anyone else have anything to say about contradictions or anything?
I mean, most of the time when you experience or you run into people bringing up contradictions, they don't actually have any contradictions. It's just something they've heard. And that's where it's like, have you done the research yourself? Have you actually read, studied the Bible for yourself? And most of the time, the answer to that is no.
I had a professor who once said to us that it's a matter of looking at the same situation, which we would call like a vantage point, but from different angles of that same event. And when you look at things from different angles, you're looking at the same event, but your angle is interpreting or seeing it in a specific frame that all of the other vantage points from those angles are going to see it in a different way.
Yeah, and we're going to have to actually wrap it up here, but I do want to kind of end with, we were going to be talking about how Brian came to the conclusions that he came to, but really we all have a similar testimony, and, we all have had to look at truth, or look at the fact that, look at our reality and say there has to be truth. And for there to be truth, there can't be other truths that contradict that truth.
I just think it's important for me to add this, is in coming out of that and realizing that there's nothing in that mysticism, I got to a place where I said, I need to pick this up and read it for myself.
Yeah.
Because even going through my first 16 years of my life in church, even in church, it wasn't connected to this, really. There was very little Bible in that church. And I realized, okay, this doesn't work. I need to look into this for myself. I want to find out what this has to say. Not what other people say about it, but I want to read it. And that's what I would encourage anybody.
And ask yourself the question, is there any substance in this?
Right.
Versus, is there any substances in this? Ask yourself that question in an honest fashion.
And the Bible is of no private interpretation, it says in 2 Peter 1:21. And so we know that the Bible is truth. Jesus says, sanctify them through thy truth. Thy word is truth. So if you want truth, we encourage you to read the Bible, watch some of the sermons on our website. And thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time.
Till next time.